morning, good evening, and good night, everybody. My name is Sarah, and today we're comparing Ready Player One, the book, to Ready Player One, the movie. Now, just to be clear, this video contains lots of spoilers, both for the book and the movie. Because it is a comparison video, you can't accurately gauge all the differences without going into detail about where they are and how they affect the plot. So if you haven't read the book or haven't seen the movie, go ahead and do that. I will tell you right now, I did not enjoy this movie. It made me motion sick, and it was not faithful at all to the book, which really affected my opinion on it. So maybe you'll hear a negative connotation to my voice when it comes to discussing the movie portion of this video. But overall, I'm trying to keep this as neutral as possible. So, with that being said, let's dive in. Now, all my notes are in this notebook, so I will be referring to it throughout the video. It's just kind of jumbled words and stuff, but I want to keep track of my thoughts, and hopefully we can get this all in nice and neat order, okay? Okay. The first thing I want to bring up is the fact they completely got rid of the gate system in this movie. In the books, when the characters got a key, they had to go through a gate to go through another challenge to get the clue to find another key. In the movie, they completely got rid of the gates. It was the character would find the key and they would be given the clue. You didn't have that extra challenge or extra step to make sure a character was worthy of continuing on with this thing. And that does trip up later because it does affect certain characters, but overall I don't think it affects too much. I just think it was cut for time's sake, which I get it. This was a very long book and the movie was only 2 hours. So there's going to be some cuts naturally, and I understand removing that from the plot. One of the bigger things that they changed is the fact that they took Wade off of Ludus, which was the planet he was going to school to, and they removed the first key challenge and put it on a different everything. Like, in the original book, the key had to be gone through a Dungeons & Dragons map, and you had to face the big boss at the end to get the key, and you had to play him a game of Joust. And this sort of set up Wade's knowledge of what exactly this contest was. It showed how much he knew about the 1980s and how much he deserved to get through this contest and win it because he spent his life studying this. But they removed it, and instead they replaced it with a car race, and it was something that everyone knew existed. And the thing about this book, one of the reasons why this contest hadn't continued on like the way it originally had in the beginning was because people started to believe that these keys don't exist. And the fact that they just throw it in the beginning saying everyone knew that you had to beat this race to get the first key just kind of took away that from the plot almost. And also it's like they set it up that people had known about this race for years and no one had reached the end yet. Which is, if you've ever played video games, and if you've ever played video games stubbornly, you know you try every single tactic in every single way. It just boggles my mind that they would say that people have been trying for years to do this race, and no one has figured out that you need to go backwards instead. One of the things that was affected by the way they changed how they get the first key is the fact that they took away Artemis, like her introduction. Yes, we've known about her from her blogs and stuff, but Wade meets Artemis through Ludus, through finding this key. She has known about this key for months, and yet she hasn't been able to beat it yet. And yet, when Wade shows up, he can do it because he's knowledgeable about the exact task that he would have to perform. In the movie, however, because everyone knows of this race, Artemis and Wade meet up on the racetrack, and it kind of takes away a little bit from Artemis, I feel, because she no longer has that defining moment that she was the first one to figure it out. Instead, they're on the racetrack like everyone else. One of the things that follows Wade being the first one to get the key is his fame and fortune. Now, yes, this is touched upon throughout the movie, but it's the money part that's kind of, they twisted slightly. Like, they just said that Wade suddenly got all this money. When in fact, yes, he was given some when he got the key, but he also kind of had to sell his image to make more money, to make ends meet. Because he sold his face on lunchboxes and had a television program where he sold ad time, and it was this strange combination where they just kind of skimmed over it and said that he had the money. The movie takes place over a much shorter amount of time than the book does because they skip quite a lot from the book that did take up a huge portion of the time there. But at the same time, I feel like it's just kind of missing an important part of Wade having to survive on his own through the Oasis and in the real world. If any of you have seen my video on Ready Player One, the book, my review on that, you know I did not like the romance in it. It was creepy, it was disturbing, it made me very uncomfortable, and they simultaneously focused on it and yet glossed over it in the movie. They pushed the entire romance subplots into the beginning of the movie, and they just kind of they had their little fight, they had their little spat, and then they just kind of got over it. There wasn't this huge time gap where Wade is trying to convince Artemis that they should still be together despite the fact that they're Gunters. And it's just kind of skipped, and I get it that you had a lot to do, but at the same time it was very strange that they just kind of included it and yet skipped it. One of the bigger problems I had that was really more of a nitpick for me is that they didn't show the way that people followed the high five through the keys and through the gates. It just kind of showed that they were the ones who knew it and had it, and then the Sixers just kind of were there. It didn't show the fact that they were continuously following Wade, Artemis, H, Shoto, and Daito. And it's kind of, it was weird because it definitely took away from the Sixers and their intimidation factor that they were on the tail of the high five. Another thing I want to mention, they are not really called the high five until about halfway through the movie, and it's Wade, the one who calls them that. They get that nickname from the people. The people start calling Shoto, Daito, Artemis, H, and Wade the high five because they're the five who made it. And it's, I don't know, it feels kind of forced, you just add in halfway through, especially since you know the original meaning of it. But again, it's just one of those nitpick things I have. Going into heavier spoilery territory in terms of the plot, the final battle or the final key, the fight to get to that, was done very strangely. Because they got rid of the gate systems, they also got rid of the prizes you get for going through the Jade Gate, which was having the option of getting a giant robot. And well, yes, they did keep some of the giant robots. They just kind of threw them in there, honestly. I get why you couldn't include Voltron because Voltron. But they kept Sorrento's Mega Godzilla. It was thrown in as one of those things he just happened to have, which I get it, he's the big boss. He's going to happen to have a lot of things. But they just kind of gave H an Iron Giant like they had them making it at the beginning of the movie, which is nice that they hinted at it beforehand. Another thing that they kind of just glazed over was the whole PvP zones and the leveling up. In the book, it's a very big deal that Wade is only a level 3 when he gets his key, because most people are way higher than him. Being a level 3 Gunter is basically making him a laughingstock in the community. It just shows he doesn't have experience, he doesn't have money, he can't go after what everyone else is. And when he gets the first key, he starts leveling up. He starts having the ability to go into these PvP zones and fighting and winning and getting what he needs to move on. And the fact they completely skipped or didn't even bother mentioning that kind of felt a bit off-putting, especially since this is supposed to be centered as the idea of a game, and it no longer feels like a game. It just feels like a virtual reality, which it is, but the whole point of the Oasis is that it was originally a game that expanded. People who have levels, it was a big deal in the book, and now suddenly it wasn't in the movies. And yes, H still goes to Battle Royales, but at the same time, it's not mentioned in the fact that these are different zones than anything else. Now I want to talk about the differences, what they did with the characters. First of all, get it out of the way, they had all the characters meet up way too quickly. These people should not have met in real life until the very end of the book. And it was a big deal when they met in real life, and just kind of took away from the impact. And I'm going to touch on this later, especially with each different character and how it affected them. But it is something I had a problem with. Now I'm going to do these characters in order of how much I care about them. So the first one is Shoto. Let's get the obvious out of the way. They changed his name. In the books, his name, or his avatar name, was Shoto, and in the movie, they just called him Sho. That might not seem like that big a problem, but the fact that his brother's named Daito, their name's supposed to go together and mean something in Japanese, because that they're supposed to be Japanese, they're supposed to be living in Japan. And in the movie, they're not, they're living in America. In the books, it's stated that they may not be blood related, but they care about each other so much that they consider each other brothers. And in the movie, it just kind of glosses over that fact, and so an average viewer would think, oh, they are brothers. Obviously, they are. But they're not, and that's supposed to be a big deal. Another thing about this movie, about Shoto, he doesn't die, which is like a really good thing for the movie and all, because the actor that they cast was 11, he was adorable, and he was funny, and it's like, if they killed him, that would have been horrible and heartbreaking and totally gotten off the whole sense of the movie. But at the same time, his death was important to the book. Like, I get it not killing off Shoto, but maybe, like, kill off Daito? Like, maybe, it's one of those things, like, it had an impact, and then they just completely glossed over it, and I felt like it could have done so much more with the movie. Very early on in the movie, in fact, one of the opening scenes, Shoto and Daito are seen meeting up with H and going to the Battle Royale to get what is their mecha giant robot, which is supposed to be something that they get with Wade during the breakup period between him and Artemis, which was supposed to just connect them in a way that hadn't been before. And so now apparently in the movie that all these characters already knew each other. Like, it didn't have the reveal that suddenly these two strange people who no one had any clue about suddenly were there in the high five, and apparently they were just that good, and they had the time. They realized what they needed to do. They didn't have to mooch off of Wade or H or Artemis. They could figure it out on their own, and they didn't need people's help. And yet, in the movies, they kind of do. Because it's explained that once Wade figures it out, Artemis was there with him and figured out with him, and he blabbed about it to H, and then H blabbed about it to Daito, and then Daito also told Shoto. So it kind of just feels like everyone's following Wade, when in fact, Shoto and Daito were smart enough to figure it out on their own in the books, and I feel like it just takes away from their character. So moving on to the character H, first of all, their reveal, like, who they are in the real world, completely done way too quickly. We didn't have a chance to be invested in the appearance of H in the Oasis to realize that's not who they are in the real world. H did say a couple lines that were meant to be Wade's conscience, which I get you can't have a narrator in this movie outside the opening scene, but at the same time it's, well, actually, it kind of did hint at who they were in the real world almost, but it felt like that sort of reveal should have been saved towards the end of the movie, but because the characters met up so quickly, it just couldn't, so it kind of took away the reveal. One of the things they took away from H, and actually took away from the whole movie, were the chat rooms. Traditionally, in the book, there's these chat rooms people could set up and they could run. Private chat rooms are way more expensive than public chat rooms that you just had to invite people into. H was meant to run one of these chat rooms, and that kind of sets up the people who are in there and how the information gets leaked of how they got the first key. When in fact, they just kind of met up at H's workshop there. And it was, I don't know how to put this in the right way, but it got rid of the most annoying character in the book, yes, but it also took away from the IOI. It took away what they knew. It took away how they got there. And I'm going to talk about IOI later, but at the same time, you have to realize they needed to have that information be public knowledge because it wasn't just the High Five who had the key. Everyone had that key once they figured it out. Going into Artemis and what they changed with her. Well, first of all, they gave her a backstory. You see, in the books, Artemis was completely an online personality until we realized that she was living with a family in the suburbs somewhere. But in the movie, they introduced her way too soon. She and Wade are not meant to meet until the very end of the book, when instead in the movie they meet up right away. And not going to say this becomes a problem, but it does change the character dynamics a little bit. You see, they took away Artemis's parents. She no longer lives with her family in the suburbs. She now lives in what she calls the Resistance, which is a complete joke and does not exist in the book at all. But I mean, I get it, they needed a setting for Wade to crash at and for them to meet up, which, like, I guess it's a decent transition. They actually give her father a backstory as well, which feeds into a plot later with a point I can understand them changing. The fact that Artemis's father became an indent for IOI and died in their servitude. And later in the movie, it was Artemis and not Wade who became an indent for IOI, which I'm going to discuss when I talk about Wade, but I don't mind that change too much because I understand why they did it, but it is something to note. Minor pet peeve that they did with Artemis is that they changed her character design slightly. Now, I understand you can't cast the exact right actor for the appearance because you want to go with their ability to act more than how they look like, but at the same time, her avatar, which was completely CGI, mind you, had red and black hair, while in the books it stated she had raven black hair cut in a Joan of Arc style, and in the movie she was clearly modeled after Pixie, which, again, pet peeve, but it's something of note. Going into Wade, he seemed really bland in this movie, all things considered. They took away most of his knowledge. They didn't have him express this desire and his love for Artemis the way that he did in the books. His knowledge that he had gathered when looking for the Easter egg, when trying to figure out Halliday's contest, was really loosely glazed over, and it just kind of left him really bland. They spent very little time focusing on his character in the real world, even though he was in all the same scenes all the other characters were in, and they focused on those actors quite a lot. So I'm not entirely sure why they did that, but they did. One of the things that they changed, which I understand, cutting for time reasons, is after his stacks blew up, he moved to a new location, and they did in fact change the locations of this book to movie. It is now set in the same location throughout the entire time, but in the books he moved there and he got an apartment by himself, he worked by himself, he did what he could to survive by himself, and in the movie they just kind of all meet up and they all kind of head out in H's car, and I get it, time constraints, but at the same time it takes away from Wade's character, it takes away from what he can do by himself. Transitioning between two of these characters, I feel like this is a very important plot point to bring up. The fact that Wade spent some time in between the breakups and he played Pac-Man for a ridiculous amount of time, and that is when Artemis got the next key, when he got this coin. Now, in the books, it was heavily foreshadowed. Like, you couldn't figure out what was going on, but you knew that this was going to do something. You see, Wade had to play a perfect game of Pac-Man in order to get this item that he wanted, and this item was just his quarter stuck to the Pac-Man box, and he couldn't get it off, and so he decided to play the Pac-Man, and when he finally beat the game, he got the coin, and he couldn't take it out of his inventory, and he couldn't do anything, but this coin was very important to the final part of this, both the book and the movie. And in the movie, Wade did not get it through Pac-Man. He got it through a bet with one of those android guys who run the Memory Museum. And the memory guy was Og. You see, Og was completely taken out of this movie, except for the fact that he played this android guy. In the books, he was just kind of there in the Oasis. He ran the nightclub. He was there, his presence was known, and when he was taken out, they had to replace him with something else. And so with Wade no longer going through the gates, that's how they managed to give him the coin instead. But they didn't focus on it at all. It was just kind of one of those things. It wasn't foreshadowed, it felt so cheap at it, and I know I was going to say this was going to be neutral, but at the same time, it's like, that was there for a reason, and they changed it. Now, his appearance in the Memory Museum seems to be kind of a reference to Wade's assistant when he was living on his own in the apartments, which is like a nice little hey there call, but at the same time, it's not right. One of the biggest problems I have with this book is the fact that Og did not get involved with a high five at all. And that might have been the reason they had to have Shoto and Daito living in America instead of in Japan, because he wasn't the one to fly them from Japan to America, even though the energy crisis was going on, because they were already there. So removing his character and removing his influence from the movie kind of forced all the characters to be in the same location, roughly. I literally have an entire page of notes for this next character. Sorrento. They made him a complete wimp in the movie. They took a pretty decent villain and split his character up between 3 different people. There was the boss man, Sorrento himself, and then there was the chick in the real world who dealt with all the dirty stuff, and then there was the guy in the Oasis who was really just there for comic relief. The girl in the real world did not have much character to her at all. She was just kind of there. She was just kind of a single note character. She was a threatening girl who got stuff done and wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty. Like, I don't care. Give her more of a personality than that, because she was actually in this quite a lot for not having any personality at all. And talking about the guy in the Oasis, they made a comment somewhere in the movie that just kind of took away from the Sixers and the threatening presence. He made a comment that the Sixer drones were getting in the way. And it seems so stupid for that to happen, because he was supposed to be working for the Sixers. They were supposed to be on the same note. And the fact that they got away just totally takes away any threat that these characters had. So even though they had this powerful female character who, again, wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty, she was essentially the hitman of the Sixers, Shoto was not dead. So that basically took away all the threats and all the fears that this character had, because she did literally nothing. She was there to look intimidating. Oh well, good job at that. She wasn't. During the negotiation scene between Wade and Sorrento, again, because they took away the chat room system, they had Wade's character avatar as a hologram in the real world in Sorrento's office. And that does in fact set up for a plot point later on in the movie, but at the same time it seems so stupid, because Sorrento leaves his password for his Oasis account on his Oasis chair that he made, and it just, why they did that seems so stupid. It really does. But, well, I mean, again, it sets up for his character, the fact that he's a wimpy idiot. Okay, that was all the character differences. Now it's time for a few minor things I want to bring up that they changed that wasn't plot related or character related. Well, I mean, one of them was. The character related thing is the fact that Wade's aunt wasn't completely horrible. Like, in the books, I feel like she was that way so you wouldn't feel sad about her death. But, like, they kind of made her not horrible in the movies, and then she just ended up dying anyways. And her death had, like, no impact. So, like, why bother changing that? It was just a little change, but nonetheless. There was also very little mention of the energy crisis that this world was going through. The reason why so many people lived in the Oasis was because they couldn't afford to live in the real world anymore. If you want to go on vacation, you go on vacation in the Oasis because you can't travel in this world. And it was only brought up in the very beginning, and I felt like you could have mentioned it once or twice. But, like, the problem is they had the entire real world final battle taking place driving down the road, which is like, if you're in an energy crisis, why are you driving? Like, you really shouldn't. Talking about the final real world battle, Wade suddenly knew how to fight. I get Shoto and Daito because pretty awesome. They're supposed to be representing samurais, but Wade suddenly knew how to do all this epic martial arts stuff, and because it was shown that his physical actions affect his avatar's actions, that meant he had to be actually fighting. And in the final battle, yes, he was tethered to the ceiling, so he could do some pretty awesome flips, but it seemed so fake and so just thrown in there, which it was kind of a useless change. All things considered, the ending was actually pretty faithful to the book. Like, yeah, they got rid of the giant robots and all that stuff, but it still was everyone in the Oasis showing up to fight the Sixers. It still was the giant force field around the castle, which was, yeah, they got rid of some plot points, yeah, they got rid of the spaceship, yeah, they got rid of such and such and such and such, but the ending was pretty good, minus the fact that they were simultaneously fighting in the real world, which again makes zero sense because they were supposed to be in Ogg's house in a completely different location entirely, but no, they were in H's car, and yeah. Closing up with one of the changes I don't mind was all our current pop culture references. This movie takes place in the not so distant future, 2045, which means our generation right now would still be around. We would still be influencing the Oasis, because in the Oasis, you can do anything. So yes, I liked the Minecraft reference. Yes, I liked the Overwatch reference. Though that was just, there was a little bit too much in there for that, even though there's just here and there. I did see it quite a lot, but nonetheless, it was a nice little hey there. Going over all these changes and seeing what they did and how much they cut and how much they edited, I understand, because it's not a short book. I listened to the audiobook, and that was at least 10 hours, I believe, if not 15. The movie was only 2, so I get it. They had to cut a huge indent storyline. They had to rush the romance arc, so I get it, and it's understandable. But at the same time, there was so much that they left out that could have been added, or there were strange changes that seemed completely pointless in my opinion. But again, this is supposed to be neutral, take it as you will. If you're going to see this movie, be warned, it will make you motion sick in the beginning and a little bit in the middle. It's just the way they have the camera angles, and there was just soaring and swooping. I'm not one to get motion sick, but I did get very motion sick watching this movie, so just be warned if you're going to go see that. Thank you so much for watching this video. I know it was a long one, but like, I have one of those memories where I can see everything, and I can point out those weird little things that they changed, so it's literally just me rambling for half an hour, is it now? It's going to be edited, so it's going to be like 20 minutes. But if you liked it, go ahead and leave a comment down below on what you want me to compare next. The book and the movie, what do you want me to read next and review, which could be anything really, as long as it's not romance. I'm not a fan of romance. Or, you know, you could just kind of leave a comment saying, hey, I didn't like this movie. Hey, I did like this movie, and here's the reason why. Be sure to leave a reason why. And while you're there, don't forget to hit like and subscribe and all that good stuff. And as always, good night, good evening, and good morning, everybody.